Special year that was, as Zach Wolchuk alongside the Super Bowl champ Bryan Broaddus here on the official postgame show of your Dallas Cowboys. 7-9-1. The final record on the 2025 season as the Giants beat the Cowboys 34-17, and we bring in the legendary voice of your Cowboys, the great Brad Sham. And Brad, I believe it was 511 points, the most in franchise history the defense gave up this year. How happy are you now to not have to see this version of the Cowboys defense again?
Yeah, I'm very happy. Very happy. There were a few players on there you like, and that stayed after it and played hard. But as a unit, they were just bad. Now, it's funny because that number is a real number, and I don't know if Bryan will agree with this. The gut feeling I have is it's not as bad to look at as the 2020 team.
Yeah,
and the one that Monty Kiffin coordinated. Whatever year that was just awful, and this one was bad. It didn't feel worse to me than those two, but that's pretty bad territory. It's a bad neighborhood to hang out in, and I mean they've just got to fix that, and it starts with players.
Yeah.
The coaching wasn't good, and I think there are people they can get who can do more with whatever they have. I really do. And I've always thought highly of Matt Eberflus, but
yes,
it starts with players. They don't have enough good players, and they've got to fix that.
Yeah, Brad, I heard you and Babe talking in the post, and I agree with you guys. And Babe talked about it might be 6 or 7 different players just on the defense, and people on the text are going, "Are you serious? 6 or 7?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, I'm serious. 6 or 7. It really needs to be that drastic of a turnover on that defense.
Yeah, I mean, I do think now that we didn't really see Overshown this year because he was getting his legs back under him, and then he got hurt again. And I think you can say the same thing about Rebel. We never really saw who he is, and I don't think we really saw who Logan Wilson is. I'm not saying he's the answer to anything, but I do think that Overshown and Rebel can be very. I think if those would be two, but you've got to have several cornerbacks, and you've got to have I'm going to say 2 ends at least, and that's presuming re-signing Clowney.
Mm-hmm.
I think you got to have at least 2 ends. You got to have 2 or 3 cornerbacks. Maybe Rebel can be one of those. And then when you get it's 5 or 6 at least players, and then you can get to who's going to coordinate what and what scheme can they find for those players. I do like the idea of having Kenny Clark with an off season in the system, and whatever the system is, and having Quinnen Williams for the full year. I think there's a lot they can do with that. But you do need about a half dozen different contributing players, not just fringe, contributing players. And now some guys can jump up and improve from one year to the next, but they need a few.
We've talked a lot about the defense throughout the year, Brad, but when you go back and think about the special teams, how would you evaluate how they performed this season? And now are you concerned at all with Brandon Aubrey with some of the misses? I was saying no to those that were pushing back, but maybe I'm being a homer because he's a fellow Plano Wildcat.
Yeah, no, I don't think you're being a homer, Zach. I'm not concerned. Hey, Aubrey missed 6 field goals this year, and 5 of them were of 55 yards or more. The one he missed today was 57. And that missed by inches. He missed 1 or 2 other 57s and a 59, and I'm sorry, I don't hold that against a guy. I believe that now I do want to see him get a little steadier on knowing how to handle the kickoffs to help maybe reduce some of these returns. I thought that, and I've been very vocal about it. Anybody who's listened, I thought the kickoff coverage was poor. And I know the statistics don't say poor because their average opponent drive start was like 15th, 14th, so it's right in the middle of the league, so it's average. But you can't let a team start at the 40-yard line. And that doesn't sound like a lot of difference between the 35 and the 40. and the rules are encouraging short fields because it leads to more points, and that's what they want. But I think there's ways to be a little more consistent with maybe seeing if you can find a way to have the starting point be the 20-yard line, and you don't have to allow these 25-yard kickoff returns that get you out near the 40-yard line. So that part I thought was poor. The punt return game statistically wasn't good. I didn't feel like it was awful, but you'd really have to go back and look at tape and see how they were blocking differently. Certainly Turpin didn't have as good a year as he's had in the past in the punt return game. But so, I mean, I would give them a C, Zach. I think they can be better, and I think that there are some areas that they can be a lot better, but Brandon Aubrey is not even on the radar of problems.
Yeah, the things that I think about, just go ahead and kick the ball out of the end zone. Let him start, where you better having it there than trying to. I think sometimes we're thinking this thing. I think we're trying to get too
the
cute.
Landing zone.
Yeah, I think we're trying to, and you do not have guys that are covering well enough to pin guys down.
Well, it's the penalties on special teams as well that's been really bad.
So now there are two things. Each of you has made a significant contribution here to what part of the problem is and why you might not want to just kick it out of the back of the end zone.
Yeah.
If you reduce the penalties and improve the coverage, then you can if you kick it into the landing area and the ball's caught at the 5, you may be able to stop them at the 25, 26, 27. That's a first down. That's a whole first down from where they've been starting.
Yeah.
And I think that's possible, and I think that's a reasonable goal.
Brad, Shadi talked a lot about culture all year, and that's what he's trying to instill in year one, and I'm all for the discipline and the accountability. But, like, in your experience, how do we see the culture that he's building reflect on the football field? Is it just as simple as winning games?
It doesn't translate, Zach, in my opinion, directly. Where it translates, the accountability winds up resulting in winning some games that you're not winning. Culture is not having guys be away half of the off-season program. Culture is having everybody buying in and working together and not being selfish, and then doing things that we never see and only can hear about, like not being late to a walkthrough, not missing or being late to a meeting, paying attention in those situations. That is a big part of the culture that the public never sees. Now, when you have people dotting the I's correctly, I think what winds up is attention to detail pays off. And then you wind up winning some close games that you weren't winning before. And maybe you wind up covering kickoffs better. Maybe you save a first down on every one of those things. And maybe you run routes better. And maybe things are happening with more accountability in not missing tackles and things like that. They're subtle, but I think that's what is meant by culture, and I think that is a worthwhile goal, if that's an answer to your question.
Absolutely.
Brad, and we've talked about really with the coaching situation with Schottenheimer and excuse me, with Eberflus. Is this something that if in fact it is done, do you feel like moving on from him, do you feel like it's something that they're going to do much like they did with Mike Nolan, or is this going to be one of those things where the Cowboys tend to drag things out?
Well, I hope they won't drag it out. If they have decided, I mean, they do, it doesn't mean it has to happen tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, I don't like an overly hasty emotional decision in football or in life. So you got a couple of days, stew on it, think about what you have been thinking about doing. Right. But if you have made a decision, then you can take a week, but you don't have to take more than that.
Yeah.
And I'm not qualified to say how the rest of the defensive staff has performed. My understanding, Brian, you might know a lot more about this than I do, is that White Cotton, the defensive line coach, was basically someone Schottenheimer brought on.
Right.
and that everybody else came with Eberflus.
Right.
And if that's the case, then I think you have to really examine those things. My personal preference would be, if they decide to move on, that first of all, I would want Schottenheimer to have a large say in who that coordinator is.
Yes.
I would like him to have Schottenheimer able to convince that guy to keep White Cotton if that's what they want to do, because I do think that his people perform pretty well. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to let the new coordinator present to the head coach the list of guys he wants to bring with him to coach all of the other positions. And that the sooner you can do that expeditiously, the better. Now, there are some guys that I hope they'd be looking at who are in the playoffs. So I'm going to throw a name out that, Zach, you and I have both thrown around on Twitter, and that is Jim Leonard.
Yeah.
I've been a Jim Leonard fan since I did some Cotton Bowls that Wisconsin played in when he was coordinating their defense. And so I would watch a bunch of tape, and I would say, wait, Jim Leonard, I remember him playing in this league, and holy cow, look at the way those guys play. And that would be somebody you'd like to have. And he's currently the secondary coach in Denver. Mm-hmm. So if they want to interview him from coordinator, then you can do that. But I don't think you can do it until they're out of the playoffs, and they might very well be in the Super Bowl. But if that's the guy that you lock in on, there's ways to know that so that you don't have to wait a full month if that's the guy that you want. And if that's the guy you want, then, there's ways to talk to agents. And, Brian, you know this better than I do.
Yeah.
You can talk to agents without talking to the guy and say, that's our guy. As soon as he's done, bring him to us and have his list ready. And so I think you could do that expeditiously whenever that candidate becomes available. If it's not Leonard or someone else who's involved in the playoffs, then if they decide to make that move, I would hope they would move on to the next guy as soon as they can. Schottenheimer made a real good point, I thought, on his pregame show today, and it was like right at the end, so it was easy to miss. And that was, if you don't make the playoffs, you really have to take advantage of these couple of weeks, because you now have some evaluation time that's not available to playoff teams. Yeah. So you've got to take real good advantage of this time that you have and don't want to make sure that you are a step ahead on your evaluations, and that means of everybody and everything, so you can get going real fast. So if they don't have their eyes on, if they move on from Eberflus, and if they don't have their eyes on someone on a playoff team, then let's not waste time. And if they do have their eyes on someone on a playoff team, let's line the ducks up in as much of a row as we can, so whenever that guy becomes available, they can move, because they need to have a very clear idea of what and who they want and why. And if it is Eberflus, by the way, my opinion, he's going to have to convince management, including the head coach, that he's prepared to be more flexible than he was this year. Yeah. I don't know how to get away from the conclusion that he was more insistent on playing the players in his scheme than he was in fitting a scheme to the players. I don't know how to avoid that conclusion. And that, to me, is backwards coaching in a team sport, and especially this team sport. So if they decide that they're going to stay with Eberflus, hey, he's still a good football coach, but he's going to have to handle it differently than he did, and they're going to have to give him different players, and everybody's going to have to be on board with that. Now, that sounds to me like long odds against all that happening.
Brad, thank you so much. Safe travels. It's always a privilege and an honor to get to chat with you, my friend, and hopefully we'll be doing it again next year.
Yeah, amen. You know where I am, Zach. You guys, during the week, I don't change my phone number.
Perfect. All right, we'll certainly be chatting then during the off season. Right. We appreciate you. Thank you so much, Brad.
Have a good night, fellas.